the room, giant, on a table. We want you to write down groups that you want other people to know about. We make sure all of that goes out in our notes. If there are any events that you want people to know about, please also write those down back there so that we can make sure those go out in the notes as well. We do take notes. We actually take lots and lots of notes. Who here is getting the notes from the series? All right, and it's okay if you haven't read them, but I'm just curious. Has anyone read the notes? Okay, if you have not gotten the notes and you would like to, leave me your name and email on the yellow piece of paper here on the table. That's the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition list. Chris Wood also has a list for bail. So I recommend signing up for both. But if you want the notes, write them down on that piece of paper. The other way to get them is if you are a part of the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition listserv. I also post them there. So if you want to just get them off the listserv, you can do that. On May 8th, we are hosting a 7th soil series. We just can't stop. The last one is April 24th. It's in 2 weeks. And 2 weeks after that, we're going to have the 7th one. There won't be any speakers. It'll be 3 hours long. And at that event, we're going to plug everybody into action. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot from you. We're taking really good notes, including your questions, your statements, your interests, things you're already doing. And we're going to work together to plug people in and get active. Sharing information is great, and meeting you all is wonderful, but we need to start working together. And let's see, what else did I? Oh, our sponsors have been flashing behind me on the screen here. We have 23 businesses, farms, organizations that have stepped up to support this. And what I want to share with you there is I sent out one email to about 19 people saying, hey, do you want to speak at this event? And I sent out another email to about 25 people saying, hey, do you want to sponsor this event? And almost everyone said yes to both emails. So that's really good. We've hit something that people are excited about, and I'm so glad you all could be here. So I'm going to turn it over to our panel, and I feel like you guys are really far away over there. We're going to have, each of these guys are going to speak for about 7 minutes. Boom, boom, boom. You're going to see some slides, a little bit of film, and then after they're done, we're going to get into a circle and have a discussion. So Mindy Flint is our first speaker. Do you want to stand, or might be easier for everyone to see you? There you are. Well away. Mindy Flint.
Hi. Decided yet whether I'll use this microphone or not. I will. Okay, I will. I have decided. I will. Good. Okay.
You just heard all the
right over the
Cat will give you the instructions on how to. Yes.
Ice cream cone.
Okay. Ice cream cone. Superstar, rock star. So, welcome. This is a wonderful series that Kat and Chris have put together, and I'm so grateful to be part of it. And I want to say this is the most important work that we can really be doing right now, is resilience building locally. And so by being here, you are part of doing this incredibly important work. I want to talk to you a little bit tonight about that link between soil health and community resilience. And first I want to set the context for this with a little bit of background on the organization that I'm part of, called Community Resilience Organizations. And this is a nonprofit that's mainly based in Vermont, but we also work a little bit throughout the rest of New England. And it is living evidence that really beautiful, wonderful things can come out of terrible disasters. Community Resilience Organizations is a product of Tropical Storm Irene. The founder of the organization, Peg Elmer, she was living in South Royalton at the time, and She was teaching at Vermont Law School. She was teaching hazard mitigation planning, and she was also working at the state level doing all sorts of hazard mitigation planning and helping the state prepare for climate change events. And her house was decimated during Tropical Storm Irene. What she was doing really hit home, literally. And so as she was looking around the state, she was observing communities that bounced back faster than others. And then some communities took a really long time, took years to recover from Irene and from the destruction. So she was wondering what it was about these communities that bounced back faster. And what she determined, looking around the state, what it was that it was communities that were more tight-knit and had closer relationships, and people knew their neighbors. And that won't come as a surprise to many of you, but that is just the reality. And so she built this organization based on that concept, that to survive and thrive in the era of climate change, that we really need stronger community relationships and deep relationships with our neighbors. So what I've been seeing, I came on as the executive director of community resilience organizations a little over 2 years ago. And what I see is still that the most important thing is these community relationships. But what I'm seeing more and more of now is the importance of localizing in a different way, and for so many different reasons, and particularly looking at water, energy, and food, the WEF nexus, water, energy, and food. We need sovereignty in these areas. These are our basic human needs. These are the things that we cannot live without. We all need to drink water. We all need to, in the northern climate, stay warm, and older and younger people especially need to stay cooler. And we need to provide food locally and not be relying on food being shipped in from California and other places. We have the ability to grow it here. And healthy soils, having healthy soils is such a huge part of this, obviously, but providing our basic human needs. This is now what I'm seeing is really the most important thing. And then, so we need sovereignty in those areas, but we need connectivity, connection to each other in the form of community co-creation. And that's the relationship piece. That is, that's something that that is what is going to carry us through, and that's how we need to be localizing by building these community relationships with each other, really with each other and our neighbors. And that not only will help us provide our basic human needs and having some codependence on other people in our community, but we will become happier and healthier humans as a result of that, and more connection. So I want to challenge you to think about resilience, and that word in a much broader definition than you may have in the past when you're kind of just thinking about responding to some disaster, bouncing back, resilience. I want you to think about it in terms of the past, present, and the future, and I want you to think about resilience in terms of your individual role. So ask yourself the question, what brings me joy? What are my strengths? What are my passions? What are my personal gifts that I enjoy sharing with others in the community? What brings you joy that you can share in your community and you can do in a way that helps your community provide their basic human needs and services? And how can you joyfully contribute in that way? How can you use your personal gifts and blossom and help in a way that benefits your community and helps expand? And so that can come in so many different forms. You don't have to be the person in your town who's leading every initiative and doing all of these big, really public things. Like, do you happen to make a killer lasagna? Because if you do, that could be really useful. And you can make that killer lasagna out of all local ingredients, or try to grow all of them yourself and make that and share that with your neighbors and have a little community event. Or are you really good at social media stuff? Like, could you maybe volunteer with a local nonprofit and offer to do some of that for them? What are the things that you're good at and that you like doing that you can share, and how can you be present in your community? That is what I'm trying to do with community resilience organizations, and this nonprofit is a way to kind of help with the cohesion around all of this and around this resilience building, so you feel like you're part of a larger movement, because you are, and the contributions that everybody makes are just incredibly important. And how are we doing in time?
You're cruising. You're
Got
great.
2 whole minutes. I'm talking really fast. Can I do a song now instead? No, but the way that we operate as a nonprofit is in different communities all around the state. And there are 12 different communities now who are working with us. Yeah, it's good, right? Yeah, we started out with like 2, and now we just keep building. And actually one in Randolph has just started. It's Randolph, Braintree, and Brookfield. But the way that we operate as an organization and trying to help be a, kind of like an incubator for this resilience work is that volunteers in communities all around the state, and also in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, they decide that they want to form a team, a community resilience team, and then they can choose whatever they want to focus on, whether that's emergency preparedness or whether that's all sorts of different really fun events like Potato Fest. Hartford is starting Potato Fest, a ton of different things, and then the communities also share information with each other, but it's just, our organization is something that helps with the cohesion of all of this. What else do I want to say? What else do I want to talk about? Yeah, I think the main message that I want to get across is that it's really important to think about resilience in a really personalized way, and finding your own individual role within that, and that there's support. And a question that I want to put out there to you to think about throughout the series tonight is, what will it take? What does it take? What can it take for individuals to get involved more and in some different ways that they haven't necessarily been involved in their communities before? And how can we turn all of this into a bigger movement, a wider movement, building a culture of resilience, so it's not just an anomaly and something we do sometimes, but that this is always in our mind. We live in the climate change era. We live in a really scary, difficult, but beautiful and wonderful time also. And we're all here to support you and our communities, and we're building this together. And so it's just what to consider. How can we do more, and how can we turn this into a more cohesive movement together?
Awesome.
This is Simon Dennis, and he's getting the technology ready. Simon Dennis is with the Center for Transformational Practice in White River Junction. And he's going to tell us a bit about the work that they're doing, and also his reflections on resilience. And the social mycelium is what I like to think about, with all of us working together and mimicking our great ones under the ground that are showing us how to do it right.
Thanks, Kat. And thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate Kat and Chris for inviting me to participate in this way. As Kat said, I come to you from the Center for Transformational Practice, where we advance inner transformation as the foundation for positive social change. And so we do this through offering programming, including workshops and retreats, and also doing networking in the community, in particular with directors of nonprofits.
You won't hear Simon. Does he need a mic?
No.
No, he's good.
Great.
Directors of nonprofits and clergy and some activists. Oh yeah, I didn't plug that in. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's the backyard where I live. And so when I think of social mycelia, I wanted to approach this not from the standpoint of the apparent connections between people, the types of things we can graph on paper, our organizational affiliations and the connections between the different organizations, but rather what you might call the subtle social mycelia. In other words, mycelia being something that happens underground is the way that one plant communicates with another in ways that we don't actually see. It's kind of so for me, social mycelia triggers thoughts about collective consciousness. And so what I wanted to do is just say a few things about that. And we can recognize collective consciousness anytime we're within a group by the means of the way that the group field evolves over the course of the time that we're together. And every group that we enter into is the social field is evolving and changing over the course of our time together. And it's quite flexible. We can adjust it with very minor things. For instance, I can adjust the social field in this room right now just simply by pointing out, friends, we are a group. Here together, in this room, we are a group. And you notice that when I say that, there's a little bit of a shift that takes place in the energy of the room. So when you see that shift, you know, oh, there must be something there that's shifting, because we noticed a difference. So we take a social field quite seriously, and it has a lot of implications for how we can navigate as organizers and how we can work in groups. When you build the social field, you are in a position to exercise a greater kind of collective synergy in the group. You bring out the collective genius in the group. You also can develop friendships more easily. It becomes a more hospitable environment. And ultimately, you become more comfortable in your own body and enjoy your work together more. So investing in the social field has a lot to offer us as organizers and activists building resilience in our community. It's a very important thing to focus on. But what I wanted to do is focus on an aspect of the social field which actually holds us back. And that is the way in addition to the social field also dictates everything that can be said or thought within the context of a certain group. And we can notice that quite a bit by means of the way in which what we can say shifts when we move from one group to another, or what we can think shifts, move from one group to another. So I wanted to just do a little experiment here. I'm going to ask you a question, and my request is don't try to answer the question, but just observe how it feels in your body for me to pose this question to you. The very important question for our particular historical moment. The question is, are we in an emergency time? If you're like me, your response to hearing that question involves a little bit of tension, because on the one hand, you say, yes, we're in an emergency time, but on the other hand, you say no, because a lot of your activities are sort of geared towards business as usual, and we're heading down this track, and we forget that. And not only that, you also have to navigate with the assumptions of the group that you're now part of. What are our collective assumptions about what kind of time we're in right now? This particular question is important because it lays the foundation for a lot of what we're going to do together. So, for instance, when Greta Thunberg says our house is on fire, that actually you can get a feeling of how something is being disrupted. That's a super powerful statement for her to make, and why? Because it disrupts our collective assumptions about what we're up to at this time. So this is the flyer that was hung up yesterday on over the bridge that passed over 91 by the 350 Next Step Next Step, Vermont. I can see that we use Greta's remark there, indicating what an important.
Was that that little girl?
That was Greta. Greta said that, and yes, I was on the group that helped to hang these things, and I enjoyed that. So okay, how do I know that we have a big part of our heart and mind that's dedicated to business as usual? As some of you know, I'm on the select board for the town of Hartford. If you ever want to join a group that is experiencing a lot of inertia in terms of the evolution of its thinking, I recommend you join the select board. The select board is deeply tapped into the collective social field of thinking in the whole town, right? So it has to average that all out. Not a terribly progressive environment. And so we do things like we're currently considering, are we going to spend $3 million or $4 million building a pool? And sometimes I'm in this discussion, I'm thinking, is this what we should be doing in an emergency time? Or should we be investing that's getting our roads ready for the kind of severe weather events that are going to be coming down the pike? Or are there other things we need to do to prepare for the future? So, you can only spend so much political capital bringing these things up, but it's definitely on my mind. And we also have, it's nice to follow up on Mindy, because we have a community resilience group in Hartford, and that Kai is on as one of the founding people. And we spend a lot of our time doing things like looking at fire preparedness, looking at the hazard mitigation plan, collaborating around things that we would probably be doing regardless of whether or not we were in a state of emergency. And very rarely does the question come up, we're potentially facing human extinction. Or we are on the brink of massive societal collapse. What does that say about resilience? Is that in our definition of resilience? And for the most part, it's pretty hard to bring that forward, because the social field within which we're operating is the municipal social field, and it basically excludes that kind of consideration, that kind of dialogue. So we talk about things like the pool, and we enter into these. What I wanted to do is share with you a story. Actually, I got a couple of slides to advance through. There's a select board environment. That's the kind of thing we talk about in the select board environment. And the last thing I want to do is I want to share with you a story that may interest you. That starts about 3 years ago. We hired a town manager who happened to come from a career in the Pentagon in the town of Hartford. And first of all, I should say he did an excellent job. We're extremely fond of this man, and he did a fabulous job. There he is, standing at the microphone. And after after about a couple of years, he came to us and said, my health is not good enough to do this job, I have to step down. So we initiated the process of hiring a new town manager. And I developed kind of a working relationship with this fellow after I got to be chair. We had to meet every other week and figure out about the agenda. And when we got to the very end of his time at Hartford, we had set the agenda. The two of us were sitting in his office across from his desk, and we had some time. And I said, Leo, I want to talk to you about some ideas that are on my mind, and I want to just ground truth check them to see whether or not this makes sense to you. And he said, yeah, sure, let's talk about it. What's up? So I said, well, I'm thinking about severe weather events, and I'm thinking about this $3.5 million that the town of Norwich is now trying to spend on repairing their roads from the damage that was done on July 1st, 2017, and the projections and how that's going to affect our budget. It's like, yeah, this is very serious. So I'm thinking about the way we're dropping bombs in 7 other countries right now, and the global movement away from using the US dollar as the Federal Reserve currency, and the effect that could have on the economy. Thinking about resource issues and kind of the way resources could evolve, like some scarcity in that regard, social unrest. We kind of talked about these different things. And I said, I just want to know, do you feel like we should be talking about these things on the select board floor as part of our obligation to take care of our citizens? And he's, after thinking over, he said, yeah, I do. I agree with you. It turns out he agreed with me not only in terms of the specifics that I was bringing up, he agreed with me in terms of the overarching conclusion, which is that our responsibility to the citizens of Hartford to take care of them includes being able to include this notion of the potential for systemic collapse as a reality that we're in right now. And here we were in the last 3 weeks of his career as the leader of town manager, and I'm thinking to myself, well, first of all, how come I never heard this from him? Second of all, how come he never heard this from me, right? And third of all, is there any way we can And I said, would you be willing to help us in this regard? Could you say something to the select board, to let them know your views on this? Because everyone respects you so much, and if you it would help us have this conversation, who knows, it might save some lives down the road, right? If we could do this. And he said, actually, yeah, I'd be willing to do that. I'll bring it up with the select board if I get a chance. And as it unfolded, it turned out that his health was not good, and he missed a couple of select board meetings at the very end, and it kind of just went by, and there was no opportunity for him to share that point of view with the select board. It happened. Anyway, the reason I want to share this story is not so much because of the outcome, but because of what it said to me about the pervasiveness of the social field within which we operate. That assumption about what the other folks are thinking, so the importance of building resilience and the importance of willingness to disrupt. Willingness to spend that social capital in order to disrupt the assumptions of the group that you're in, bring forward the alternative counter-narrative, and what happens if you do, what happens if you don't, type of thing. Well, here's an example of that, the other side of the bridge here. Caution, climate crisis ahead. You can see the walkers going across the bridge. Thank you all. Thank you guys. How did I do on time, Jack?
That was perfect.
All right.
Perfect.
Like your internal timer is on.
Next we have Henry Harris.
Hi. So, Kat brought up that she wrote to a bunch of folks and asked them to do some stuff. And hell yeah, we did what she asked us to do. Kat Buxton is amazing. I set my 7-minute timer because Kat Buxton is a serious business.
You got your own timer.
No, I wanted your timer too because I need constant supervision if that's not immediately obvious. My name is Henry Harris, and I work with Kat and Grace and Molly and some other folks here at this brand new Center for Grassroots Organizing in Marshfield, Vermont. We just got a bunch of acres, and we're crossing our fingers that it's going to have something to do with nonviolent revolutionary organizing, centering regenerative agriculture. What do you think about that? Yeah, all right. So we think it's a great idea too. Right now it's just mud holes, snow. And then Karen and I and others also work as the Vermont Climate Union, trying to promote sort of a democratic, united front around what the hell are we doing about this climate crisis, making sure that we're experimenting with democracy. I think right now there's this kind of moment that we're in where, what the hell do we do? There's this climate emergency, right? And when Simon just asked that question, are we in an emergency? And he asked me to feel what I felt like, I felt relieved. Because people should be asking that question way more often. I think we're in an emergency, and just to hear somebody talk about that makes me feel less alienated and less crazy. So we are in this emergency. And right now, there's this thing where we're hoping that these nonprofits and scientists and folks are going to have this moral argument and are going to just shame the legislatures and the capitalists and everybody into doing the right thing, even though they know and we know that that's not going to happen, right? So this slide that you can all see here, these are chinchillas, right?
Looks like a white paper.
I thought Simon was going to talk more about chinchillas. Who's down with the chinchillas? So anyway, this slideshow is kind of long. It's kind of I was going to just run through 2 hours of you tall people, get out of here. We don't care about this slideshow. Some massive guys bumbling around in front of me. Can I get some taller people to stand here? Anyway, so the idea is there have been these social movements. We know all about them, right? And they have been a product of really good organizing. Back in the 2000s, the early 2000s, me and probably several of y'all were part of the global justice movement, the anti-neoliberal, anti-globalization movement. Right? And we were in the United States, we were mobilizers. And we would just all show up at once, we'd make a bunch of noise, and we didn't really know a lot about organizing and really creating grassroots institutions and big membership organizations. So now I've got to mess with these slides, huh? This thing doesn't work. What happened? Okay, so what did I do with my cheat sheets? So there's
Pointed at this thing.
these are these ideas that great. These are these ideas that Mindy and I came up with about these basic tenets for the kind of movement that we need. Do folks feel like we need a movement?
Yes.
Yeah,
of course.
Now, do we feel like we're scaled up enough and like are a big enough movement yet?
No.
How about the degree of coordination between different geographic areas and different aspects of the movement? Are we well coordinated?
Yeah.
I like that. Who made the fart noise? Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. So, and I think that there are a bunch of tried and true methods to try to help us coordinate and create that movement. And instead of sitting around trying to, make sure everybody read the latest cool book that makes us really sad or really inspired, we need to be employing these methods, right? The methods that are coming from the civil rights movement, right? Ella Baker, who none of us know enough about, but I do have this amazing 45-minute documentary that we should all screen together sometime, was sort of the lead strategist for 30 years of the civil rights movement before any of us ever heard of Martin. And she fought really hard to make sure that all of these organizations all over the South and all over the Eastern Seaboard were independent and were coordinated with each other, and we're talking about nonviolent revolutionary resistance and other things that they thought were really important. Let's see what else. So there was also the populist movement. Yep, the populist movement was amazing, right? The global justice movement in the early 2000s, we didn't know it was an agricultural movement. We thought it was about these sort of abstractions about world trade and sovereignty and, Venezuelan oil companies can't push this around or something. But no, it was led by Via Campesina and agrarian interests from all over the world. And they were trying to stop the long-term plan coming out of World War II of complete agrarian dominance of especially the global South by the Monsantos of the world and crap like that. The populist movement started in a little county in North Texas in 1889. A couple redneck cotton farmers, basically sharecroppers, tenant lien farmers, got together and they started a little newspaper, and in 3 years, by 1892, they had 40,000 trained lecturers presenting in tents across the entire country about fiat currency and the gold standard and basically teaching people to bulk their cotton and refuse to sell it to the market until the price went up. Big agricultural strikes. Now that was an amazing economic vehicle for their movement, and in 3 years' time they had millions of people, 1892, in wagon trains from Oregon to DC. That's who the populists were. They had a bunch of analysis that maybe we wouldn't be so down with today, but they did put J.P. Morgan, the biggest mercantile company in the world, on his ear. It was amazing. What I think, incidentally, I've just been kind of, everything I end up getting involved in always feels like something that I should have already been involved in for a long time. I kind of panic. I've been working with youth and stuff, trying to work with them because they want to keep it in the ground and whatever. This right here, this is a movement that's going on. A just transition is being promoted by the Indigenous Environmental Network, the Climate Justice Alliance, the Grassroots Global Justice. These alliances are the biggest frontline, people of color, indigenous-led alliances on the planet. And we all hear all these other nonprofits talking about, let's follow the frontline leadership and let's be awesome to people of color and blah, blah, blah. Now come over here and donate to us and we'll pay these white people to sit at their computers and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, there are these amazing movements from all over the global South, and they're talking about a just transition. Is that my 7 minutes? That's amazing. All right. Well, really nice talking to you. Okay, everybody please just go like this. Okay, knock, knock.
Who's there?
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Oh, is that my timer going on?
What was it?
No, it's in my pocket.
And our last speaker is Chris Wood. And you're going to show us a little film clip.
Yeah, with my 7 minutes, change of pace from the other amazing presenters I'm going to show a clip from a film that we made. It's called Dancing with the Cannibal Giant, New Stories for the Great Transition. And it's just a clip that I love Simon's presentation about the social mycelium. And the big question that I always ask, Mindy talked a little bit about, okay, resilience, but how is it that we really get to change ourselves? Both as an individually and when we are in a collective space, can we do it there as well? So this film, the intention was just a couple of stories, and I wanted the one that sort of, since this was the soil series, I chose the topic that really sort of connected with the soil, and I have some discussion items for after we get going, but let me get it up and running, because I've only got 7 minutes.
It's an emergency.
Oh, everything's working so far. So this is just one of the stories from this film that we show around the area. If anybody wants to see it, we show it to 8 to 18 people is a good set to sit around in a room and have a conversation after.
I started doing African drumming when I was 6 years old in the first grade, and my sister joined with me, and then I believe she did it for 2 years.
Something like that.
And I've been doing it for 5 years.
Our daughter Nishima is 13, our son Emmett is 11. They've spent most of their childhood on this land. Before that, they spent the early part of their childhood living in urban south end of Albany. You know, it's interesting because they're so immersed in the experience, their ability to reflect and see how it's different from other children is still limited. So my son will say, for example, oh, I don't really know anything about farming. And then he'll proceed to give a 45-minute tour to college students where he's explaining why you need all these varieties of heritage chickens and how you intercrop fava beans to capture nitrogen for your tomatoes, who are heavy feeders. So they have a deep knowledge and a deep belonging. Nishima was overhearing me talk about supporting a sister organization with their strategic plan, and she said, well, have you thought about encouraging them to use appreciative inquiry model? You know? So I just think they're going to be very employable. In fact, we've started hiring them. So Emmett does youth groups, and Nishima does a lot of kitchen management, and she also proofreads my grants for me.
I mean, a lot of the people that come here are like really driven to change the world in what I think of as a better direction. People will come from like everywhere, all over the country, and just to see how much they value our work and how much they want to be a part of it.
Soulfire Farm, in some ways, you know, started as an idea when Jonah and I and our 2 infant-aged children were living in the south end of Albany, New York, and Albany, our neighborhood was termed a food desert by the USDA, meaning that even if you try really hard, it's almost impossible to get good food, to get fresh fruits and vegetables. So Jonah and I both had a long history of farming other people's land and had a dream of having our own land. And when our neighbors found out that we had those skills, we were really encouraged to find that land, grow food, and to bring it back into the neighborhood.
We purchased the land in December of 2006, and when we arrived, these soils were as about degraded as they could be, and we've really spent the last 5 to 6 years building our soils, really seeing it as the source of the nutrition for our communities.
Well, I think in regards to to the production of our farm, first of all, and why we are focusing on delivering food into food desert neighborhoods. We actually prefer the term food apartheid, which is really the food system that we have right now, where certain people live in food opulence and have access to their Whole Foods and their Trader Joe's. And there are also a large percentage of Americans, mostly Black, Latino, and Indigenous Americans, who don't even have enough to eat, never mind high quality food. And so the result of that is that even as our nation, rightly so, focuses attention on the rash of police killings against Black and brown people and mass incarceration of Black and brown bodies, we're actually 5 times more likely to die and be sick from diet-related illness than we are from all types of violence combined as Black people. So our farm share accepts, on a sliding scale, financial contribution for the foods. You don't need a car because that food's going right to your doorstep. Folks stay with us for many years. They come out to the farm, we go to their houses, we cook together. So I'm gonna ask you to just take a deep breath in and make sure you fill up your whole chest, your whole back, your whole belly, and then just let that breath out. And then let's do another one. We run training programs at various levels for beginners up through advanced on how to farm and how to access land and credit so that we can become independent farmers. And we also work with a lot of Black and brown youth. So when young people come, yes, they learn some farming skills and some cooking skills, but more important, it's about that reintroduction in a really whole and healthy way to the earth. So first of all, thank you all so much for coming. I know you came a really, really far way and had to get up so early in the morning. And I don't know what Ms. Maxwell told you about this farm, but we're really dedicated to food justice and dedicated to ending racism in the food system. So like everything you do today goes toward that mission. Like we're going to be in a few minutes taking care of some soil, and that soil will grow food for people who otherwise wouldn't be able to eat healthy food.
I think a very large goal of this farm, Soulfire Farm, is to spread the vision, the mission to other people so that they can continue this work. People come from very far away to come to our programs, and although that's awesome, it also really shows the need for this work in other places.
I think for me, what roots me and keeps me hopeful in the face of the machine is a Jewish teaching out of Pirkei Avot that says you are not obligated to complete the task, but neither are you free to desist from it. If I consider myself obligated to end climate chaos and to figure out how to feed the entire world, then I'm not going to be able to get out from under my covers. But I also can't desist from doing everything in my power toward those ends. And if I can inspire one person or 10 people or 100 people to do the same, that collective energy might be enough to shift the machine. And if it's not, and we lose, which is possible, I would rather go out knowing that I never gave up hope, that I always believed in a bright future. And in the process of building that bright future, I'm actually having a good life. And my children are having a really good life, and the people who come here are having a better life. And so the present moment is enriched by that work.
I think we're going to do a little round with our end speakers, but I think while we get our ducks in a row, maybe y'all could make a circle. Yeah. Big oval circle. Please be mindful of our kind cameraman.
We didn't cut off at everything. Gotta stay hydrated.
Check. Can you hear me on the other side of the room?
I hear you.
Over there? See, I love this part when everyone gets to see who else is here. It's great. So I'm going to ask that our four speakers get a moment to sort of summarize what they heard from each other and set the stage for this round. And what we like to do at this point is when we pass the mic, try and hold it, notice that it's different here than here.
Yeah.
I don't really need a mic. If you're like me, don't worry about it. But if you're quiet, please do use it because we want to hear what you say. And we want to know who you are. We want to know where you're from. And, in Vermont or New Hampshire or around here, where you're living now. And then when we get to it, we'll also want to know, do you have any questions? Do you have any statements that you want to say? We're not going to do Q&A. Not only do we not really have time for that, but it's most important that in this next 45 minutes, we get to know each other, because we are the ones we've been waiting for. This is our community, and we are the ones that are going to build resilience upon the resilience that has been built before us, and we're going to continue to do that. We have to. We don't really have a choice. And we're going to do that together, and we have incredible skills. And when we do these circles, I'm always impressed and inspired by who's here and the collective skills that we have. I feel less worried every time I meet more of you. Chris.
The last time I used the mic, it was all like, people said, oh, it's garbled, I couldn't hear you. So, I'll use my loud voice, which is much better anyway. What I want to say about the film that the little segment that you just saw, is an important part of the work that compels me personally. I'm the director of an organization that has a sort of a very wide focus in terms of programming.
Would you?
Oh, Beth. Understand Beth's need to hear. You can do this. This works? Because the last time you said it was garbled.
It's a little bit further.
A little bit further down.
There you are.
Over the top.
No, that didn't work. Okay.
Just a little inch further away. Really.
Okay. Is this it?
Yes.
That's it.
Okay. Everything's coming back in the cycle here. What I want to say is, very briefly, the focus of using this film is for me is part of the work that I want to be personally focused on, which is around the concepts of consciousness raising, culture shift, and being able in small groups to be able to identify together a collective both pain and trauma that we're all feeling, but to actually come to that in the same space together as an opportunity to perhaps move us beyond the place where we are incapable of finding the capacity to change our routine in our daily lives. Because what happens is we're all conscious, We say, oh gosh, climate change emergency, the emergency, absolutely the emergency. But how do you really, when you walk out the door after this meeting or after going to the climate march or whatever, how is it and what are the things that are going to actually move inside your body, inside your heart to make that shift? And I think actually it's been a great panel because I've been inspired by the different characteristics of each of the presentations, and hopefully the inspired words of Leah Penniman is just another guide, someone who's actually found a space and actually has sort of a conscious awareness of why she, and clear clarity about what she is doing and why she's doing it in the full context of acknowledging the emergency.
I used to ask my students and try to parse this out. What is it that makes some people feel a sense of responsibility for other people and for the world? And why is that absent in some people? What is that? And I think just by nature of who is here tonight, just by being here, I think you feel some sense of responsibility. And I think that there has been so much good work done, and there are so many bright paths forward, though we are definitely in the midst of an emergency. And sometimes, I appreciated that question too. And it's, yes, we're definitely in an emergency, and sometimes we can let that reality go because we're also sitting here after having a delicious warm meal calmly in the presence of neighbors. It doesn't feel like an emergency in this present moment, yet we also know that it is. And so how can we use both of those feelings, the feeling of emergency and that calm, nourished feeling of and joining together to move forward and actually address this emergency together with cohesion.
Thanks. I just want to say that I'm really honored and flattered and all of that to get to be sitting up here with y'all and here with all of y'all in this. I love it when we come to Randolph and do the center of the state thing, say out of Chittenden County and stuff. Kat, tell me the whole name of this series again.
The Soil Series, Grassroots for the Climate Emergency.
Right. Grassroots for the Climate Emergency.
You named it.
Yeah. That was your... Yeah, you did.
I wasn't sure if I got it right. Anyway, the idea of the grassroots and the social mycelium and stuff that folks have been talking about and all of these connections and Leah talking about the diligence of trying to get this work done together. It was so cool to see that, by the way, this kid sitting over here by Karen, those kids are the first people that I saw influencing her to talk about pop culture and sing, Britney Spears or whatever, and it was really cool to see them up there educating college kids about soil health. And I think that it's been really cool to see those folks I used to know in a completely different context, and they've got big social lives, but they've managed to discipline themselves and make a big offering to a larger movement context. And I think that we're just all called on to do that. We've got this network, we've got these resources, and I think we've got this, whether it's an ethical or spiritual calling, to figure out how to share effectively, right? There's this lady, Grace Boggs, who's this kind of movement philosopher from Detroit, and she talks about this is the revolution, this is the first revolution in human history where we're going to be fighting for our right to sacrifice instead of to gain, right? Getting off this global economy and probably joining each other in some kind of managed consensual poverty in hopes that our consumption doesn't tip the tea cart here. So anyway, it was nice to only have to speak for 7 minutes before because it could be kind of inferred that it was going to all come back together if I'd had a little bit more time. But I think, what I was trying to get at is that there have been these agriculturally based movements in the past. I think that our main economy is the dairy economy in this state. People are getting milk checks with a suicide prevention hotline brochure in them from St. Albans Dairy Co-op. And there's an opportunity for us. We're sitting here talking about soil health. All of us here, we're talking about, intensive grazing, rotation, and blah, blah. It'd be a hell of a thing for a bunch of Northeast Kingdom farmers to make that kind of transition. But that would be justice if we supported them in making that transition. And with all the talk about water quality and the climate and the dairy collapse, I think we've got an opportunity, as grim as it is. And I hope that we can all work together to make that regenerative opportunity, not all these little nonprofits and little individual brave white people thinking out loud about what everybody should be doing, but us taking opportunities like what Kat has set up for us here tonight, and Chris and the rest of y'all have set up for us here tonight to get together, talk together, and then work together. And I hope that we're all here for when the rubber hits the road in a couple weeks for the next steps conversation. Thanks.
Thanks,
Yeah, if there's something that I would like to amplify, something that was said by Mindy mentioned earlier today about the importance of no one solution, but rather the solution is through doing what you love. And I think there's some real wisdom in that I always try and keep in mind, because with urgency, sometimes we can think, then we have to twist ourselves into some kind of a pretzel, which is an unnatural state. But actually, our ability to impact society is a factor of depth. It's a factor of depth of dwelling within ourselves. It dictates the depth of our impact. Depth of dwelling dictates depth of impact. And when are you dwelling more deeply than when you are doing what most calls to you, what you most love? So I think that there's an aspect of good news to that. The fierceness of the call is also good news insofar as it's an authorization to drop those things that are not most precious to you. And similar to that is a fierceness of willingness to be in community with one another, which is part of what, just to mirror what Henry was just saying, part of what's happening right here in this circle. There is a form of warriorship associated with meeting people that you've never met before. It's a random group, and saying, we're going to form community right now. And we're going to form it on the basis of the fact that I'm going to tell you what's actually in my heart, and I'm going to listen with an open heart to what you have to share. Is a huge piece of the solution as well, which is also good news, insofar as that form of community is so much of what we most fervently long for and desire.
My name is Adam Yankauskas. This is my first time participating in this series, and I think it's been really great hearing all of you speak, and the video that you presented as well, plus the follow-up. I feel that for me, when I look at the theme of today, and resilience being the core of it, from at least my takeaway, I'd say the biggest thing is to look inward in terms of the day-to-day interactions of what you typically consume. Especially in the United States right now, we consume much higher rates overall than most every other country. We have a lot of conveniences to us that are, you can walk down walk to the store in many communities here. You can drive to the local market. I asked about where a particular crop came from when I was at the market today, and it was shipped in fresh from California. And I thought about, it's just like, well, I wanted the leek, so that's what I ended up getting. But recognizing that that came from very, very far away, and looking at local consumption of crops that are seasonal is a big aspect of that, and what's available and what can be not processed, not shipped, and just grown right at home or right at your neighbor's home and shared among the community.
Excuse me, Adam, I couldn't hear what town you're from.
Oh, I actually an out-of-stater. So I'm up from Massachusetts this evening. So I live in Gardner, Massachusetts.
Yeah. Welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you. Welcome you. What? Gardner. That's the chair city.
Yes, yes. So thank you all for this evening, and I look forward to hearing what everyone else has to say. So,
hi there, my name's Diosha McDade. I live up in Worcester, and I'm a carpenter, and I also run an Airbnb out of my home, which is a little homestead. And yeah, I'm gardening and starting a little permaculture food forest and working towards getting my Airbnb more into a space where I could feed people that come and stay with me and have like a little micro farm and have an educational aspect to that. Kind of like the Airbnb experience. People can come up from the city and just learn what it's like to, you know, live in the country. You know. Yeah,
Right.
this is.
The mic's not working.
The mic's not working. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, I'm just not pointing it the right way. But yeah, really glad to be here and learning more. Thanks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can hear you.
I'm Jesse Markson. I'm living in White River Junction right now. Just extremely interested to continue to immerse myself in this community, starting a little farm. And I guess the question that I have is just more open-ended, but just how can I listen more intentionally? How can I be a part of each and every one of all of your lives more effectively and just be a part of this movement just like everyone else wants to be?
Hi, I'm Grace. Are you hering me?
We are. Yeah. I can just hear you, yes.
Okay, well, you can hear me anytime then. I live in Barnet, which is in the Northeast Kingdom, and I have been involved with the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition since, over a year, but my whole life has been devoted to advocating for organic agriculture, practicing as an organic vegetable producer for a while, teaching about it and every other way that I could to promote the general goals of this community, and I'm thrilled at the way people have been participating and the number and quality of participation, and I particularly made the effort to come today because of the quality of the presenters who I know. And I think, what really spurred me personally to reassess everything. This has been a hell of a year for reassessing everything in my life. But what really forced me to confront the climate emergency was a health emergency. And in January, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I was an early stage, and with the help of an incredible supportive community, I'm doing great, and I'm going to end up in better shape than I was before. But the lessons learned and the critical importance of the work we're doing has never been clearer to me, and I have so reaffirmed my personal commitment to doing everything in my power while I'm still able to work with you all and make this happen. So thank you all for being here.
Hi, I'm Sylvia from South Stratford, and I care very much about the soil and try very hard to do the right thing. And I've never talked about this part of my life before, but I think now is the time. I've been a vegetarian for 55 years, beginning in high school. And it was not part of a group or a movement. I just kind of figured it out and began living this way. So I want to invite others to think about what relationship should we have with animals. Should we be killing and eating them? And what relationship do we want to have with the land? Is this an appropriate land use? And just check in with yourselves and see how you feel about these issues. And if you feel, as many people do, that meat is an important part of your diet, perhaps you can do it less. So, I do mean invite. Just see where you are with those questions.
Hello, my name is Stuart. I live in South Stratford with Sylvia. I'm a composer, which means I farm music paper. I think it would be probably a good idea for groups that I heard the presentations of to check in with the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, and the National Institute of Health. They all have gamed it out. The CIA, I mean, the Pentagon, the generals, they're highly educated folks. And they gamed it out years ago that the major problem for the United States is monetary and weather. It's not like another country coming here. And the CIA analysts, it's the same. And the NSA sees it, because they're the ones that do the satellite spying. So it probably, I'm a Quaker and a pacifist, but I do know that those people are thinking deeply about the same things that everybody in this room is, and they have for a long time. Mm-hmm. So maybe it would be good to link up with some of those analysts in some way or other.
Yeah. My name is Kai Cochran, and I live in West Hartford on a small farm. I've come to each one of these meetings and presentations, and it's been absolutely fascinating. And I'm starting to get a feeling a kind of a feeling of coming together and being somewhat of one mind as these have come on. So I'm very glad that we're going to have this meeting on May 8th, because what I really like is action. I'm an action person. And I really want to get together with people and see if we can't figure out things to do that each of us can do and that we can do together. And I also, in my life, I've been involved with many organizations, mostly promoting things that I thought should happen, like solar energy and wind energy and all those sorts of things in Montana, and then this kind of thing back here. And I found that there are ways that you can spread the word in a way that is not difficult for people to swallow. humor is good. Humor is really important. And also, as we've thought of in our community resilience group, we've decided that humans' tendency to sort of want to vie against each other on things, sort of contests, like you know, there are so many sports that people just love, you know, and people, that we decided that what we're doing this summer in Hartford is because we have 5 villages, and we've always felt that we were kind of a scattered town because it was 5 villages and not a nice main street sort of thing. We've thought that that was going to be difficult for us, but we've decided that what we want to do is take those 5 villages and have them vie against each other. Another one of the things that we feel strongly about is that more people should be growing their own food. Yeah. And so we're having this contest that we're calling Potato Fest, where we are having the 5 villages vie against each other to get each one to get as many of the residents of that village growing some potatoes as possible. And then we're going to have a great big celebration in September where we're going to have all things potato, including a potluck and songs and games and poems and all sorts of probably skits and everything else. And we're hoping that not only will that sort of tap people's feelings that they like to have a contest, but also bring them together as villages come together, and then as we all come together at the end, hoping that it'll be a good time, a fun time, but that also we're going to learn a lot and become another little step towards resilience.
My name is Keith Walsh. I'm from Thetford Center. Yet again, incredibly encouraged by the connectivity that happens within this space. And I'm encouraged at the future that will bring out. One thing that I've been thinking about recently in terms of my social mycelial networks is the fact that, and this is off on kind of a separate idea, 1 in 2, maybe 1 in 3, I can't remember the exact statistic, of Americans are on some kind of pharmaceutical medication, and which leads to a lot of addiction issues. Yeah. And what they're saying to be finding now is that the root of addiction is a lack of connection.
Yes.
Yeah. So we, by building this connection, by our actions, by building further connection with our communities, with individuals, we under the surface are helping to build this connection to one another in a healthy way and resolving some of the deeper issues, not just in the soil, but within our social fabric as well. So know that although your intentions may be focused in one particular field or aspect of this knowledge, the ramifications, the ripples that come out from your actions through this mycelial connection, I think are going to heal a lot more of the wounds than maybe even just the physical ones that we see.
I'm Susan Mills. I live in Randolph Center. In Randolph Center.
Yeah.
You're
close.
Okay.
Look right at it.
I've been living here in Randolph Center since '81. Done a lot of different kinds of projects and community activism. And it's just great to see this continuing in this form too. I am concerned about some of the people who were not here. Inclusion is really important to me, and some of the people who just don't even think this is a problem, and particularly young people. And it's great to see that we have at least one representative. But I would like to to see more involvement with the schools. I think that, I just recently saw Greta Thunberg, her TED Talk. This was about a week ago. I've heard about her, but I hadn't actually seen her. And to see her, man, she is something. So there's a lot of potential there, I think, and if we can think of how to include more young people, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Karl Tiedemann. I'm co-founder of Soil for Climate, a nonprofit based in Vermont, and we're honored to be one of the sponsors of the Soil series. For anyone interested in following this discussion at a global scale, and if you're on Facebook, our Facebook group has almost 11,000 members in more than 100 countries, so it's a great way to keep in touch with all of the latest research, videos, articles, and so forth. I was fortunate over the last couple of weeks to attend 2 soil events, the Living Soil Symposium in Montreal, and also the Grass-Fed Exchange Conference in Santa Rosa, California. And I can report that at both of those sites, there were hundreds, 300 to 400 people, I would say, at each event, who are all very much have at the forefront of their mind soil restoration and healing land. And in particular, at the event in California, the room was about half filled with people wearing cowboy hats. And I'm sure many of them are at different ends of the political spectrum than I am. And I was heartened to realize once again that this is an issue that crosses all political lines. And very conservative people also want to, literally the definition of conservation, to heal the land and preserve a future for their children and grandchildren. And I take heart with that.
I'm Mari, and together with my wife Laura, we founded Green Mountain Girls Farm in Northfield 10 years ago. We tried to make a nod to the revolutionary Green Mountain Boys with our name. The successes include some documentation of carbon and air very deep in our soil. And in a short amount of time, we've made some changes. I can also report that we have a family that for 10 years has bought food just about every week from our farm, and they used to shop at Shaw's. So it's a really big step when a family gets 70 to 80% of their calories from within a half a mile of their house. I can tell you they were our first customers, and when they joined, we thought our future was bright. And the 10 years since haven't been that bright. Not that many people step forward and vote towards the things we're talking about, caring about with each meal and each bite. And I guess when I look at Vermont moving forward, I think that a tourism that's based on regenerative agriculture and a geotourism that really takes advantage of this endemic with obesity, chronic disease, undernourishment, and climate change all spoken about together, that we can reach out to people who do care about wellness. And as for us, we host agritourists, and we hope that together with our neighbors, these people that care about not only food as medicine, but as farms as medicine, come up to Vermont, forest bathe, come out to the farms and farm soak. Welcome to our place, come anytime.
Hi, I'm Lynn Wild from Montpelier, and I really want to say thank you for talking about this being a crisis and an emergency. And I have to agree that when I heard you ask that question and call it what it is, the sense of relief was immense. I've been recognizing this sort of by myself and pushing it out to other people since 1972, and trying to find people who could talk about it and work towards preventing it. So I'm really grateful to be here. This is my second time, and I feel like I'm at a 12-step meeting. Yes, I'm a consumer. But so I'm also on the Montpelier Tree Board, and we're getting ready to plant 200 trees in May. And we're planting them in neighborhoods and trying to get neighbors to come together and work with us to put trees on their property and explain the relationship of trees as part of our life support system with rain and with dirt, soil. And I'm really pleased to tell you that in Montpelier, May becomes Tree City. It goes from being Poem City in April to being Tree City, and to call people's attention to trees and help them understand that there is a sentience among trees that needs to be recognized. And so one of my questions is, as Gabe Brown talks about in Dirt to Soil, putting a massive diversity of cover crops on the land, what can we put at the base of trees to create tree guilds to help support the mycelial growth at the base of trees and that connectivity, but in an urban setting, not necessarily in a forest? Because our trees are really, really struggling in town to survive the assault from salt and snowplows and lawnmowers and, you know. But what can we put at the base of trees so we don't need to put lawnmowers right up to trees, or weed eaters, or let's quit weed eating, or let's eat weeds differently. So anyway, that's my thing, and I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rick Gottesman. I live in East Bethel in a tiny house that I built myself. I'm currently living on a 40-acre parcel of land, and two landowners and another person and I are in the very early stages of forming a cooperative community, which is based on low income, low consumption, and mutual aid. So I really appreciate all the proactive, positive things that are happening here, but I just wanted to bring people's attention to one other thing, and that is the idea of resistance or civil disobedience. Does anybody not know who Extinction Rebellion are? The group. Does anybody know who they are? Extinction Rebellion.
I've heard of them.
Yeah.
I don't know too much
Extinction
about them.
Rebellion is a movement started in the UK, and they're calling. They do civil disobedience or whatnot. They're calling for, it's coming across the pond to this side of the Atlantic now, so it's just starting here in this country. And they're calling for a week of action worldwide, and so far there are 120 some odd cities around the world that are taking, it's a worldwide movement, and the idea is for civil disobedience, and whatever form that takes for you. You can, the whole gamut of civil disobedience. The idea being that not only do we have to have these new ways forward in this emergency, but we also have to slow down the destruction that's happening at the same time. So it's not an either-or thing, it's a both-and, okay? The worldwide call starts the 15th, which is Monday, and it runs through the 22nd. So you can look up to see if there's any actions in your area. I don't know what's happening in Montpelier. I'm going to Boston that week because I have friends there. I know there's things happening there, so I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
We have lost 50% of all of the species on, number count of species on Earth in the last 40 years or so. Just to put that extinction thing in context. I'm Henry Swayze from Tunbridge and a member of the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition. And this, unfortunately, is my first one of these I've been to because I've been out of state and have not been here to do them. For 15 or 20 years, back in the 70s and 80s, I taught people how to do sustainable farming with livestock. And a lot of that was to make profitability better. And I took a break in that business. My wife had Alzheimer's for 14 years, and it slowed down what I was doing. And I've kind of gotten back in gear now. And I knew that we were sequestering carbon when we were teaching that, and we tried to tell people that that was happening. But the world really wasn't very interested in that, so it wasn't a big point. I now have learned from Walter Jena that we're actually cooling the planet when we cover things up with green plants and keep those plants growing all the time, which is what grazing management actually does. And that's really my focus, and I'll be presenting on that in a couple of weeks when we get to that. In terms of what I reach out to this group and to other people and to myself to try and understand, I do think we're in an emergency. I think we're moving like molasses in January in terms of combating that emergency. I do think that movements can grow exponentially, so that a lot can happen in a very short time when people wake up to the fact that things have to happen. And I think quality of life comes from community and community relationships. I think if you are a rich person living in a gated community and have two people you have dinner with once a month, and that's your life, and it's all about spending and managing your money, I think it's a pretty miserable kind of life you're existing. And so how to build that local community, how to I participate in my community a lot, but I don't feel as though it's changing from people aren't getting out and doing so much together as they did before we had media, before we had jobs, that were little narrow smokestack jobs. Anyway, so how to turn on that community, and I've heard the potato and trees, and I think I think doing things that you have a passion for is the way to energize that. But I think discussing that more, figuring out how to do it better, getting more skillful at it, it would be very important in this whole project.
I'm going to hand this back to you, if I may, because I talk with my body. And I do. I came to the first meeting last time it was here, a couple weeks ago, whatever. I was very impressed with the turnout and the in-depth scientific knowledge presented by the speakers. And I have a background in science, and I understood 2% of it. The part I got was in the tablespoon of topsoil are billions of creatures, and if you line them up back to back, it would be a mile or two long. I apologized for breaking the topsoil from the John Deere plow who invented it here and brought it to Illinois for manufacture. But I didn't apologize for running the honey wagon, where we put the manure back on the fields. I'm part of the Randolph Region Re-Energized program, and we're having a wrap-up of the first phase on April 24th, and Susan Mills told me, oh my, it's the same night as the next soil series. So John Coppens called up and he said, we'll work it out. We're kind of overlapping. And we were working on how many people we were going to have at our meeting next on the 24th with John Coppens. And I'm going to put in 25 names for the meal from this group until somebody calls me up and say, no, put in 50 names. Mark Kelly and Susan and I were working with John Coppens this morning on what our priorities were going to be for the next couple of years. And I'm inviting all of you, every one of you, to come to that meeting on April 24th to say we have to add soil to our priorities. Thank you.
Say who you are.
Gary Durr.
So is that meeting before or after ours, or what? Or we don't know yet?
They're trying to line it up so that they end at 7, so that people could, starting at 7, come to here. It hasn't been worked out. And I should say, this is primarily for people in the Randolph area. So.
Good evening. I'm David. I'm here in Randolph. And my word tonight, as several have already expressed, my word is connections. I really like the potato challenge in Hartford. I really like what the challenge that Gary kind of just described in terms of how we're going to work out the 2 meetings occurring on the same night in a couple of weeks, so that we all have the opportunity to attend both. And I get a little different take on the swimming pool issue down in Hartford. I think that swimming pool is really important. Randolph has dealt with a swimming pool issue over the last couple of years. And as one who lives just a block or 2 from the town park, and I'm through there several times a day, pretty much every day during the summer, and just see the 100 to 200 kids that are at that pool from all parts of the community. That's all about connections. And it's those opportunities, and again, the potato challenge and what Gary is talking about, that really moves us from we and them to us. And that's really our not only our best way forward, it's our only way forward. I had a very bewildering experience this past weekend. This will sound common to anybody who leaves the state for a couple of days. We did. My wife and I traveled down to Annapolis, Maryland, specifically to attend a extraordinary music event that was highlighted by an original composition written by Kathy Eddy of Randolph, and it drew us that far afield to attend, and we were only out of, of course you only get out of Vermont about 24 hours, and you do start feeling bewildered, as we did when geez, I mean, we got down to this, supposedly, quaint historic American city, Annapolis, and we're just getting, it's just a buzz of 6-lane traffic. I don't care where you're going, what time of day you're trying to do it. Just a tsunami of individuals in these 4-wheel pods that are crunching into each other and trying to avoid each other. And it was bewildering in that I was wondering, where's the community? I'm dizzy in here in this place. But the concert was spectacular, and I think the word concert itself talks about unity. And this brought together, and these are all volunteers, a 100-member orchestra, well, no, full orchestra, I'm not sure the count, but I know it was at least a 100-member choral group performing these compositions Saturday night. And it truly was extraordinary. And so even within the labyrinth and bewilderment of what seemed to be the external part of Annapolis, I realized that there are community connections. Following the concert, there were quite a few people from Randolph went. And following the concert, a former resident of Randolph came up and spoke to me. And he had left Randolph 5 years ago and lives in Baltimore now. And he said, geez, from what I follow, there's a whole new generation of new leadership coming up in Randolph. And I said, yeah, that's really true. And just the last example I guess I'll give is part of that new leadership is someone that over the years I've always been on the other side of the political issues. He's on one side, I'm always on the other side. And at town meeting, we had the opportunity to speak. He has really brought energy and an impetus to returning a rope ski tow to Randolph, the winter equivalent of the summer swimming pool. And as we spoke at town meeting, I said, this is something I really would like to work with you on. And it's probably the first time we've ever had that conversation. And so as a civilization, I think we can model that right now and realize, and a special culture of our small communities have such a great opportunity not to live as kind of we and them, but as us. And the woman from Soul Fire Farm said, she said it, and I'm going to say that, I don't know if we're going to be successful. Long term, nobody does. That's the tension we live in. But we can start living that higher expression of civilization, like right now, together. With Potato Challenge and the things we're hearing about tonight, and even with swimming pools and ski tows, they bring us together.
I just want to remind folks of the time. It is 8:35. I think we should keep going, but I just want to let you know time.
I'm Joel Parmalee. I have a small beef farm up in Randolph Center. I was also a plumbing and heating contractor in town, just retired recently. And I don't have much for comments tonight. It's past my bedtime.
So do you sell product off your farm?
Yes.
I'd love to be able to send that out to people.
All right.
Do you have a farm name?
Parmalee.
Parmalee
Farm.
Okay.
My name's Nancy. I'm from down south. I live outside of Bellows Falls. And I've been trying to connect up a bunch of different thoughts that are tumbling around in my head since I started coming to these workshops. And also, I was at the NOFA conference this winter and heard Leah Penman, so thank you very much for the clip of the work that she's doing at Soul Fire Farm. She's really inspirational, and I was taking what she said about her children and raising them in that environment, and I was busy this week creating potting soil from the wonderful resources on my farm and tending my seedlings. And when I'm not doing that, I work with teachers of young children. And growing seedlings is a lot like working with infants and toddlers and preschoolers. And I was listening to several people around the room talk about the importance of young children and families. And that's kind of what I'm about. And I've been thinking about ways that I can do things in the very small neighborhood that I live in outside of Bellows Falls. We're a very tight-knit neighborhood, and there are 2 other people in my neighborhood who do some small-scale farming and sell products from their land. And it just occurred to me, sitting here, they're both ex-kindergarten teachers. And someone started off the conversation about how do we take responsibility. And when you're a teacher or a parent, you are forced to take responsibility. And there are so many connections between parenting and teaching and being a farmer. And I live them out in my life very consciously, but I think it's probably true for all of us. And so lots of what I do, someone else said something about you have to do what you're passionate about. And I get to do both of the things that I'm passionate about together. One of the things I do is I have a very tiny CSA with family child care providers. And so I bring them food for 13 weeks over the summer, and I see their children, and I see the changes in what the children eat over that 13 weeks, and I see the impact of them suddenly eating beets and cabbage and kale, and how that impacts their parents. And so there's lots of really tiny things that we can do individually that have ripple effects, like you were talking about with your family that's not eating at Shaw's anymore. So, you know, we're in a crisis, but we're also in an ongoing process, I think, of supporting people to live through that crisis. So that's my hope.
What's the name of your farm?
Bloodroot.
Bloodroot Farm?
Hi, I'm Louise Peary.
Hold it up, I can't hear you.
Louise Peary. That's my dad right there. I recently moved to
Actually, if you hold it.
a
Really
farm
quick.
in
Yeah.
Marshfield.
Good.
And hopefully that will turn into something. I was intrigued about your comment about the pool being the only way to move forward. I think $3 to $4 million could be put towards a lot of things that could possibly be more fruitful to a community. I'm really thankful to be here and hear all of your stories and hopes for the future. Hopefully I can come to another one of these. Yeah, thank you.
I'm Karen Bixler. I live in East Bethel. I'm a retired farmer and cheesemaker. And when I quit raising animals because I didn't have enough energy left anymore to deal with that, I did have some extra energy, so I put it all into flower gardens. And then a couple of years ago, I was out in my flower gardens and I had this aha thing of being at war with weeds. And I thought, that's not what I want to do on the land. I do not want to feel like I'm at war on my land. And so I've been looking for ways since then to shift that narrative, and this series has been just phenomenal for me. I've got all kinds of new ideas.
I'm Tim O'Dell. I live in Corinth, and I'd like to especially thank Chris Wood for showing the bit on Soulfire Farm because it's a very concrete example of what food sovereignty might look like, at least one manifestation of it. I would be interested to know how it emerged from its social field and what its organizational beginnings were, and did that necessarily start with a business plan, or did it grow more organically?
Hi, I'm Tim McCosker, and I live in Thetford, and I work with community groups to set up and run zero waste community events.
My name's Aaron Simmons. I live here in Randolph. I'm currently a software engineer, avid organic farmer, and compost enthusiast. I just came out to see what the series was all about, and I'm glad that I've come out and I'm starting to feel a better sense of community about other people that care about the health of the planet and, you know, what we can do to make progress and to healing everything that ails our current existence. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I live in Jericho right now, but I'm very excited to announce that because of, in part, this program, I just quit my job and I'm moving up to Montgomery to live on an organic farm in a yurt for 6 months. Super pumped.
Yeah.
That's further away.
Yeah. Well, so we need better transportation, public transportation in Vermont. But one thing that kind of has been resonating with me today is this idea of community and how I feel like there's this inherent like spatial component of community, but at least for myself and maybe for like my own generation, I don't feel tied to a place. I've moved 7 times since I graduated from college 4 years ago. And so I think community and what community looks like is shifting. And I think a lot of what my community is online in an unfortunate way. But it's also like who I see on a regular basis that doesn't live next to me, but maybe lives 45 minutes or 12 hours away. But those are the people that I keep in contact with. And so trying to figure out how that community can be strengthened through a physical process of regenerating soil is very interesting.
Yeah. Good luck. Awesome.
I'm Cap Taylor. I live in Williamstown. And I just want to say that this series has really kind of rocked my world. I always understood the idea of feeding the soil, but I always kind of thought of the soil as an inert thing. And I thought about life in the soil as pretty much being earthworms, essentially. And now I understand that there's this incredible, diverse, dynamic, symbiotic culture of all sorts of bugs in the soil. And so now when I think about feeding the soil, I think about feeding those bugs and how that really is going to really affect productivity and the health of the soil. And now I'm finding out that this, you know, having healthy soil could really be the answer to a whole lot of big problems, and I'm really excited about that. And so I've been thinking about, well, so what do I do now that I have all this information? And so I've decided, well, I'm just going to start talking about it. So, for instance, I was talking about it at work today, and one of my coworkers was mentioning having a meal with Wendell Berry. And he was talking about the big picture and what we can all do. And he said, if everybody took care of their backyards, then we could really have an impact. And so that's a huge goal of mine as well. And I'm really grateful for the insights that this series has brought me.
Hi, I'm Beth Champagne. I once lived in Randolph. That was ending about 20 years ago, and I've been living up in the Northeast Kingdom since then. So as far as I'm concerned, my community extends from here to there. That said, I just want to get to one thing that came up really early in this round, the circle, and it's got to do with seeing with different eyes. When Jack Laser hosted a whole bunch of us for some gathering of which I've forgotten the name about a year ago, I heard Peter Donovan speak. Now I had heard about Peter Donovan and his school bus that he lives in, traveling back and forth across the country to visit about 300 farms that are trying to build the carbon organic matter level in their soil. I had heard that he had a wood stove in his old school bus and a piano. Okay, but I have not, anytime, anywhere, in years and years, heard someone who spoke with such depth, with such presence. Oh my gosh. So that's just to say that this is what his kind of key message was, and I'm not going to succeed in quoting it precisely. But it's, if you want to make small changes, do things differently. If you want to make big changes, you need to see things differently. And for me, and this is still just starting, for me, it's to have a practice of pausing. When I'm having my first drink of water or bite of breakfast, and allow myself to be aware that I have a lot to give thanks for. Have gratitude. I mean, a long time ago I understood that if I'm not happy, clean the lenses. There's nothing wrong out there, but there's something wrong with the reception. So that pause to take in the wonder of all that makes my life possible and keeping going on. That's a good place for me to start from, to pull together a community. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, 3 cheers for gratitude. I come from just over the hill there in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I did live here up until a couple years ago for about 10 years.
What's your name?
My name is Pan Vera, like the goat-footed god from Greece, Pan, not frying pan. I am aware that we're now worldwide experiencing a crisis of loneliness because we're really not connected with each other very much in the ways that we used to be, where we grew up knowing people for our whole life. So I'm really excited to see how the combination of response to crisis climate is community. I'm very touched by Joanna Macy's advice a number of years ago when she said, okay, we've gone over the 350 point, it's not looking good, so just get into community. I can't over-recommend that. And I'm also an avid gardener since I met Gene Kahn, who started this little company called Cascadian Farms. He thought maybe organic farming would become important. And so my job was to haul chicken manure onto his fields. And I'm very proud of him and very proud of the organic movement. And I'm also an avid gardener. And I have a new home that has quite a large space, and I'm going to be turning it into a community garden. One of the things Gene Kahn said was he was tired of growing garden greens. Everyone should just grow them in their closet. And we can do that. We can do that. Now let me introduce to you a real farmer.
Hi, I'm Mark Kelly, and I'm from the Far East. I live in East Randolph. Where, yes, we do have an organic farm. I'm very clear on the fact that community building is the key to resilience. And I'm clear on the fact that we definitely need to build resilience. And I'm clear on the fact that soil building is one of the keys to the environmental crisis. However, like many people, I think, I would like to get clarity about the nature of the crisis. And the gentleman from South Stratford mentioned the military, the CIA. Every 5 years, the CIA does a scenario planning exercise where they look at they just imagine what might happen in the next few years and try to think, well, what should our response be to that idea? And the European Union has done the same thing. I have to admit that the European Union's scenarios are a lot more pleasant to think about than the CIA's, but they both have a lot in common. Because starting from now, there are any number of ideas that may play out into the future, and we can think about them and start to think, well, what's the most important thing for us to do right now in the face of all these potential futures? So my feeling is I'd love to have a group like this do that kind of scenario thinking and planning and try to figure out, okay, well, where should we be putting our best efforts? And so that's my idea for now.
Here I am, the last of the group. I'm Josie Carruthers. I wasn't going to forget. Our farm name?
Yeah.
Farm name.
Rising Mist Farm in East Randolph. So East Randolph. East Randolph is like an underdog village of the area. We have a goodly portion of poverty and probably a touch of depravity and a lot of beauty. And some of us decided a couple of years ago that we are on the middle branch of the White River. And we decided that we would form a community group that we called the East Valley Community Group, it being the Far East, as Mark said. And so what we're up to, and there was a guy named John Pimental who was here earlier who's working with us deeply on this, is that we're building resilience by building a community group. We are promoting neighbor versus meeting neighbor, and we're sponsoring social events, and we're working to get our historic old beat-up community hall reopened. It's been shuttered by the town, reopened and renovated so that we can do something that some people are calling the social infrastructure in order to promote democracy and work against inequality, work against the paranoia, the silos, the gated mentality. We need to promote something that some people call positive proximity. The being around people is a great thing instead of, you don't want to do that. For example, tonight, of course, is a prime example, and this whole fantastic series has been an example of that. The social infrastructure actually means that you have physical places to go. A good example, although not always acceptable, is a bar. You get a drink and you're a participant, you're in the club. And we need to have that feeling of belonging for people, that there's a place where people can go, where you yourself can go, and feel that you are actually physically welcome there. And so that's our contribution to resilience, we have a lot of potential, a lot of hope, and I guess that's it. My final comment is I'm eagerly looking forward to this the 7th session number seven on mystical on May 8th, because as this woman in the pink shirt said, I too am an action person, and I would feel grief at the end of this series and to walk away when we hadn't knit something. So thank you.
It was actually your comments that made the 7th program happen.
That's true. So thank you all so much for yet another really great soil series night. I always learn more than I think I'm going to learn, and different things than I thought I was going to learn. And I meet new people, and I'm so grateful for that. So thank you so much. I do have a comment though about resilience that I just want to share with you. I am very interested in promoting the understanding of the soil health principles. I have them up on the wall, but they're really small. And I'm just going to read them to you. They're in all of our notes. These principles are, I think, the best thing we can do in our yards, on our porches, on our farms, in our communities. Living roots in the ground. No bare soil. Maximize diversity. Minimize disturbance. And animals in contact with soil. When people say to me, well, what can I do in my yard to do this? And I'll often say, well, where do you sit on these soil health principles right now? And is what you are thinking about doing moving you one tiny bit toward meeting those principles? And if the answer is yes, I say go for it. So I think the same is true with resilience. I love, Mindy, that you started us off with you gotta do what you love. That's why we're here right now, is because I'm doing what I love, which is talk about soil a whole lot. I got a really dirty mind. Yes, very soiled. I spend my morning working with 6th graders looking at a year's worth of compost data, and as we get ready for our soil science unit in Thetford. So do what you love, and moving resilience, I think one step is great, but in an emergency situation, in everything we do, can we move it one step more toward the world that we know we need and the world that we want to see? Can we support Mari and all the other farmers in the room? And it's not supporting like, I'm going to support you because you're doing cool stuff. It's like, you're growing important food that I need. And so it's not about like charity. I see that a lot, especially in the farming world. We're like, oh, we're going to subsidize farmers. It's like, farmers work so hard. Let's just buy their food. We don't have to, we don't have to support. So again, thank you so much for being here. The next one is in 2 weeks, April 24th. It's a Wednesday. 2 of our speakers are here now, Karl Tiedemann and Henry Swayze. We'll also have Jan Lambert and Judith Schwartz, who are 2 of our featured authors in the series, and their books are also in the raffle. And then again, 2 weeks after that will be our May 8th. If you want to get the notes and you haven't been getting them, please leave me your email. And I also want to ask you to please consider filling out a survey, because we keep forgetting to ask you. And it's really actually important for us to be able to show our funders what we've done and ask for more money in the future so that we can continue to bring you things like this and do things together. So please fill out a survey. Thanks so much.